Hello again and welcome to War Stories, behind the scenes tales from the front lines of the media. I'm your host, Tom Curley. Welcome to the show. If you're new to the show, this is a show where myself and various old friends of mine talk about old war stories that we had in the media. I was a TV director for CBS News for almost 40 years, and I've got a lot of stuff that happened in the background, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, and they're very, very funny. And of course, I could not do it without my partner in crime, the inimitable, and yes, that turns out is a word, Gary Armstrong, veteran TV news reporter for Channel 7 in Boston. Gary, how you doing today?
Just fine, just fine.
Just fine.
Looks like we're having some nice spurt of weather here.
Yep.
Nice spurt of weather.
So, now furtive weather. Now, is furtive, is that a word? Well, I guess we'll have to look that up. So we were talking before the show about, a lot of the shows, in your case, about, you meet celebrities and what happened, which makes sense. It's your job to interview them. And you asked, what kind of interactions do I have? Not at the level that you did, but of course, I interact, with a lot of people. And celebrities, but it's always not necessarily in the most positive light. Two things that come to mind: many years ago, we used to do a thing called the Cerebral Palsy Telethon. It was on Channel 9 in New York, and we did the New York contingent. It was based in L.A., and over the weekend, it was a 24-hour thing. So in that I was part of the crew of the morning news, we got the overnight shift on like a Saturday night. And there was an audience, but we didn't really have an audience. It was just homeless people coming in off the street, basically to get warm. And Dennis James was the host. Dennis James was a popular game show host. He was one of those guys that was on... Yeah, he was on To Tell the Truth, What's My Line, all those shows, a TV celebrity. And he was the host, and all I remember is hearing him screaming for security because some poor homeless guy wandered into his dressing room. And instead of just telling him, politely to leave, he just said a lot of really, really nasty things. And I went, wow, he's really not the nice guy that you think he is on the air.
Right.
But our singer, our guest that night was Florence Henderson. Yes, from the Brady Bunch, and she was a singer. She was going to sing. Turns out Florence Henderson was a singer. The only problem was we didn't have the sophisticated foldback that people do today for musicians, which is these very, very expensive head earphones that allows the musician to hear whatever it is that they want. All we had was a big speaker, just a big speaker, and so we were playing it as loud as we could without causing feedback because it was literally right behind the boom microphone. And the only problem was that she was deaf. She couldn't hear. And she kept complaining that she couldn't hear herself. And we kept upping the volume, and then it would start to feedback. And they're yelling at us, to the director, well, what's wrong? And she's going, your audio department sucks. You're horrible. You're unprofessional. This is unacceptable. And we're going, what can we do? We can't turn it up anymore. She's deaf. And he goes, well, I can't wait. The director, I can't tell her that she's deaf. I said, well, somebody should. And then the other one, So anyway, so that's so I have had those stories, but most of them were very, very, very positive, especially with musicians. Oh my God! And the more famous a musician, the nicer they were. The more unknown or upcoming, the more they could tend to be real dicks. I remember we had Andy Williams on. Oh my God, he was the sweetest guy you'd ever met. We'd go, Mr. Williams, this is the only microphone we have available. Will this be okay? No problem. Don't worry about it. We had Dizzy Gillespie and his orchestra on. Nicest bunch of people. We say, guys, and this is all we can do for you because we got in at 4 o'clock in the morning to start setting up a show, a 2-hour live show where we would have, multiple guests, multiple anchors, multiple remotes. And then they would go, oh, by the way, Dizzy Gillespie and his orchestra and his band are going to perform live at 8:30, which,
Wow.
what? Which means that we then had to
Wow.
run down to the equipment crib, get extra equipment, hook up something that would normally take in and itself a day. And we had to do that on
Yeah.
top of setting up for the actual show. And the cool thing about that was they were coming on to debut a song that they had written for Martin Luther King. It was one of the anniversaries of the death of Martin Luther King, or the birth of Martin Luther King. But anyway, it was a big day. I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. And they were going to debut it. So we got everything all together. And 8:30 came along, and the line producer goes, "Oh, our segment on makeup is going along. We're going to have to cut the Dizzy Gillespie performance. We'll record it in post afterward." And they said, "Go tell him." And I go like, "You want me to go and tell Dizzy Gillespie to tell Dizzy Gillespie that he's not going to go on live with his song that he flew in specifically on his own to do this to commemorate Martin Luther King because your makeup segment went over?" Yeah, what's the problem?
Incredible.
So I went back and I said, "Mr. Gillespie, I don't know how to tell you this." And he just looked at me and he went, "You're kidding, right?" I went, "Welcome to my world." And he laughed. and he patted me on the back and he said, "Don't worry about it, kid." And we performed the thing afterward. But that's the kind of thing. But a lot of them could be really nasty. So what do you got for me today?
Yeah.
What do you got for us today?
Well, listening to your stories, I thought I knew who I was going to talk about, but listening to your stories, I concur with you about the bigger they are. Normally, they're decent. They know that you have a job to do, and assuming you're doing your job the right way, you get along. But it's the ones who are they're on the verge of stardom, or they think they're bigger than they are. I remember when we were. This goes back actually to our college days, I believe. We did a thing with Jilly Rizzo, who had a restaurant, but he was better known as being the go-to place for Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. But at any rate, we were there primarily to do Jilly Rizzo, and in my mind, I kind of thought maybe I would see Sinatra and maybe we could get a soundbite. But we were doing the interview with Jilly Rizzo, and towards the end of it, someone pops up behind me, and I heard him. I could smell the cigarette smoke was billowing in front of my face, and I turned around to say something, and the face asked me, "Sorry, kid," and it was Sinatra. We wrapped up the interview with Jilly Rizzo, and Sinatra says, that was kind of interesting, and I heard you talking about movies. You know your movies, don't you? And I said, "Well, it's been the love of my life." And he said, "Well, me too. When I was growing up in New Jersey, I idolized these stars." And I said, "Well, growing up on Long Island, I did also." And we started talking about gangster movies. And I wrote out some names and titles. And he's sitting back, and I did some lines. I riffed some lines from Raft and Bogey movies. And he said, yeah. And he says, "What about that movie when Robinson was going through a winery or something?" And I said, "Brother Orchid, 1937 with Jane Wyman." And he said, yes, that's right. So we're talking old movies, and we're talking about how character actors really made the movies what they were back in the 30s and 40s, even though we had the larger than life stars. So before I knew it, 20 or 25 minutes had gone by with me talking to Sinatra about old Hollywood. And he said, "Why don't we do something like what you just did with Jilly? Would you mind?" And I said, "Well, I have the time." And he says something like, "Well, my time is your time." And we got the interview with Frank Sinatra. Well, as we were wrapping that up, and I still can't believe that I've done a Frank Sinatra interview, Jack Leonard, or as he was known, Fat Jack Leonard, walked in, and he starts insulting me because that was his routine, like Don Rickles. And he starts zapping me back and forth with insulting one-liners. And Sinatra looks at him, looks at me, shakes his head, looks back at Jack Leonard and says, "Get the fuck out of here, fat man. Just get out of here." And I sat back and he said, "I'm sorry, kid." And I said, it's hard for me to fathom why that just happened. And he said, "No, the guy's an asshole." And I said, "Well, I thank you, Mr. Sinatra. Call me Frank." Well, I thank you for everything. He said, "Well, it's a pleasure. You know, we don't run into young guys who really know their stuff, but if you can get back this way." We never got back that way, unfortunately. But that's a testimony to part of what you were talking about. I also think of, you were mentioning the telethon, and it reminds me of Jerry Lewis. And this is one of those stories that has been told by other people, I'm sure. Jerry Lewis might have been a very inventive, talented comedian, but on the other side of the camera, he could be a mean-spirited person. He was in Cohasset, which is a suburb south of Boston, the Cohasset, the South Shore Music Circus he was doing in his act. And we had arranged an interview. His publicist had set up the interview. This is not something we went seeking. We had the interview set up because Lewis wanted to get more publicity for the telethon that he was doing over Labor Day. So we're set up in his tent. We had the time down to a T. The camera was ready. He walked in streaming profanity, this and that and the other thing, and why these people wouldn't leave him alone. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, what do you want?" And I said, "Well, we're from such and such a station, and this is the interview that your publicist arranged." "Well, I don't have the fucking time to do that." Blah, blah, blah. So I looked at my my cameraman, who was one of these guys who went back to the 1930s, and he spoke in a very deep voice, and he rescued me. His name was Hal. Hal walked over to Jerry Lewis and said, "Jerry, this is young man is a very good reporter. He knows his material. Time is of an issue here, Jerry." And Lewis said, "What's your name?" "My name is Hal, Mr. Lewis." What are you doing here?" "I'm his cameraman, Jerry. You know, I've been in the business since 1930, and I worked with Ed Murrow, blah, 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 blah." "Oh, you did?" So Jerry Lewis starts talking to my cameraman, and they go on for 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm looking at my watch, and Hal looks at me and says, "Jerry, I think we better accommodate the young man and do the interview. It will go very well, I promise you." Jerry Lewis looks at me and says, "Well, I guess if Hal says you're okay, we'll do the interview." So we sat down and we started talking. And he was trying to get in bits and pieces of shows he had coming up. And I said, "Wait a minute, I remember, that thing you did with De Niro, King of New York. You were really great in that." And he said, "You saw that?" And I said, "Yeah, you weren't Jerry Lewis there. You really manifested the late night show host who's being bombarded by a fanatic fan, and you caught that so real. That was terrific acting." And the smile grew bigger, and I was great after that as far as Jerry Lewis was concerned. But as we were wrapping up the interview, he says, "Now I got to go back and do another friggin' show to get to my mind." And he was foaming at the mouth as we left. And I looked at Hal, and Hal said, "Gary, don't let it bother you. These people are who they are. Trust me, I've seen them in my career. They're not as nice as they usually seem to be on camera." Jerry Lewis was, oh.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yes, that is very, very true. Usually people that are known to be really nice on the air turn out to be not so nice at all when they're not on the air. And I'm trying to think of I had planned on doing this in the future because I could do a whole series on it. One of our endless stream of anchors on the morning news in the 80s, when the morning news first started, it was I think actually it was Charlie Osgood and Diane Sawyer, or Charles Kuralt and Diane
Hmm.
Sawyer. Then it very quickly became Bill Curtis and Diane Sawyer, who were just two of
Right.
the most awesome people on the planet. Just what a joy to work with. But there became a thing because we were always number three. And of course, we had to be number one, but we've been number three since the morning news started. And I used to
Oh,
tell
I
them,
understand that.
embrace it. Say, we're
Yeah.
number three. We've been number three longer than any other network. We own third place, but they didn't see it
It's not
that way.
fun. It's not fun.
So, yeah. So for a period of time there, every year we would get a new set of anchors. Okay. And every year, then we would, of course, have to have a new set, and which would mean we would move to a new studio because we had to build the new studio while we were on the air with the old one. And then we would have a new president of news, and we would have a new director, and we would have a new animation package, and we would have new music. And every year there would be a big party on the set where we would have champagne for everybody. And the new president of news would say, we are sticking with this format until we are number one. We are not giving up. And everybody, yay, and they'd get drunk. And then a year later, we would be in another studio with two new anchors, a new
Right.
director, a new
Right.
president of news, and we would have more. We had so many of these that us in the audio booth, we would collect all the champagne that wasn't consumed, and we kept it in a cabinet. We actually had a morning news liquor cabinet, so much so that everybody knew about it. So like this, the executive producer would say, oh, it's somebody's birthday after the show, can you guys break out a couple of bottles? And we go, yeah, no problem, boss, because I mean it was their booze. So this went on. And then at some point they decided, the management decided that we needed a star. And somehow they came upon Phyllis George. Now, Phyllis George was famous. She was a Miss America, very famous Miss
Right.
America, married a senator, famous guy. I think he was also a governor, probably of Kentucky. And she
I think so.
worked
Yes.
for
Yes.
yeah, she worked for the sports division. Okay. And
Right.
so they decided that she would be a good person to anchor the morning news with Bill Curtis. So there was only one small problem that sports didn't tell news, is that she was a sideline reporter. She would, be on the sidelines and interview players and stuff like that. But it would not,
Right.
she didn't do any of it live. None of it was live. And it would not be unusual for her to take 50 takes to get a segment done. So this was the person that they decided would be a good fit for a 2-hour live news program. Okay? Well, it was insane. The first day she was on the set, and again, I'm prefacing this, I love Phyllis, huge fan.
Hmm.
A photographer came out, an official CBS photographer came out to take publicity photos. So she's sitting on the news desk, and he says, okay, smile, Phyllis. And without missing a beat, with dead seriousness, she says, well, which one do y'all want? And he went, what? She said, well, I have three. And she proceeded to do three different perfect smiles, devastatingly perfect and completely different. And we all just sat there going, wow, that's pretty
Wow.
cool.
Wow.
So then
Oh, yeah.
so then we started rehearsing. All right. Now in the teleprompter, you would have written, hi, good morning, welcome to the CBS Morning News. I'm your host, Phyllis George. We've got a lot coming up. First off, we're going to go to Bill Whittier in Washington with the latest update on whatever this story is. And then in the prompter, it would say, track up, okay? Which was the script that the director needed. We used the same script. Everybody did this.
Right.
Well, she would read the whole thing and she'd go, And now, we're going to Washington with Bill Whittier, track up. And we would stop and we'd say, no, Phyllis, you're not supposed to say track up. Well, why not? Y'all wrote it in there. Okay, so now the poor, back then the teleprompter was run by two guys, okay? Two guys, one guy whose job was to scotch tape the scripts, the pages of the scripts together, and the other guy fed it through like a little treadmill, and there was a camera pointing down at it, and that's how the teleprompter worked. So one guy would frantically make sure the right page was up, and the other guy would make sure that he was running it at the speed that the talent could keep up with, or keep up with the talent. So now these poor guys had to start whiting out any command like track up, sound on tape, VO. And the other thing that she wouldn't do was every half hour that opened up, every time you came back from a break, you would say, "Welcome back. It's 20 minutes past the hour." Now, you didn't want to say it was 8 o'clock because this went on all around the whole country. So, if you were watching it in New York, it was a different time than in LA. So that's why you said 20 minutes after the hour. But you didn't know what that time was going to be. So it was just left blank. It says, "Welcome back. I'm Phyllis George. It's past the hour." Well, she would go, "Welcome back. This is Phyllis George." And and she would stop. She would just stop because there was nothing there. And Bill would look up, and you got to understand now, how do we know what the time was? There was a big digital clock on each camera.
Right.
You couldn't miss it, right? But if it wasn't written, she just stopped. And Bill would go, "It's 10 minutes after the hour. Welcome back." So the poor prompter guys had to start writing in the actual time. And then again, and lots of times they would forget because they were busy. So we had that issue. So then when we first started, she got, all right, when somebody starts on a show like the morning news or the evening news, an anchor, they have ultimate power. They are gods. They can get anything that they want. They're paid millions of dollars a year if they want a new set, whatever. Well, she decided that it was confusing, and she needed to be able to concentrate during the commercial break so that she could prepare herself for the next segment. And so she insisted that during the commercials, everybody in the studio had to stand perfectly still. Now, you got to understand, this is a set with multiple sets, interview sets, news sets, entertainment sets. The cameramen have to move into position. Stagehands have to move props. And you have to do that during the commercial break. So that lasted, I don't know, maybe 2 commercial breaks. So the solution they came up with, and nobody knows this, is they built a special room, a green room, on the set. Now, you didn't know that it was there. It was hidden. It was hidden behind a door that didn't look like a door, that was part of one of the interview sets. And during the commercials, she could go in there, and nobody else was allowed in there except her makeup and hairdresser guy, who was also the guy that decided whether any takes we did were good or not. This guy had way too much power. But so that was the solution for that. But those were the kind of crazy things that she did. But the reason I loved her,
I empathize
and forgave. The reason I loved her was because one day my whole family, my aunt, my mom, and 2 of my nephews came down to visit, and I gave them a tour of the studio. And this was after the show. Well, she happened to be there. And my first thought was, oh God, this could go bad. Why are these people unauthorized? Blah, blah, blah. But she looked at me, she looked at them, and she just treated them with the most gracious Southern hospitality. She took pictures with them. She talked with them. She signed autographs. She was just wonderful. And I remember as we walked out, I looked at Phyllis and I said, I got your back. Thank you. And she said,
That's
you're
great.
more than
That's
welcome.
great.
So she was really a really good person. So I've gone on long enough. What's your next story?
It's. I wanted to jump on that because for people watching and thinking that uh, this is easy. Uh, Using the teleprompter is it's not as easy as it seems, and I found out the hard way when we began doing a morning news show in Boston. And by the way, I could empathize that number 3 slot that you were talking about because for the longest time the station I worked for trailed the other 2 major stations, and it wasn't fun. I mean, we were always embarrassed being out in the street. Someone used to joke or throw needles at us, saying, "If you're running from the law and you don't want to be found, go to Channel 7 because no one will be watching." I mean, it was that kind of thing. But at any rate, we began the first morning show, and I was thrilled. Because I was one of the hot young reporters then, I was going to be the co-anchor, and I began my up and down lifelong affair with contact lenses, and they were really hideous for me back then. I had problems reading the teleprompter. My co-anchor was smooth. He covered for me, but I didn't master the art of looking down at the copy, looking back up at the prompter, and just going along smoothly. So it's something that you have to be very talented at. So we'll say that in Phyllis George's defense. I was thinking, as you were talking about that show, about uh, how people deal with teleprompters, deal with scripts on the air as opposed to ad-libbing. There's a big difference. I have no problem ad-libbing. I mean, these shows that you and I do, that's all we're doing. We're dancing on a dime. I think it's something that you either have or you don't have. And if you go from doing sports, by the way, to doing what she was doing, that's a whole different matter. I was thinking of one of the first people I met in the business, Merv Griffin, who, as I've said to people over the years, he was the one who told me you have to listen. And I always thought that was a given. You do listen. And that way you can proceed on with what you're talking about with your interview. And you're very up to date and you're looking smooth on the air. But having to do that off a teleprompter can be a nightmare. At one point, I recall saying when we went to a break, I said, "Kill my teleprompter. I'll read the script and try to make it look real." And they abided by that. And I was off the show within the first 2 weeks anyway. And so much of my great career is being an anchor. You have to learn, and it's a hard thing to admit that there are some things you're good at and some things you're not good at. And the quicker you learn that, the better off you are if you want to have a long career in the business. Have you encountered people behind the scenes as you were who had problems doing that sort of thing with the teleprompter?
Oh, every single anchor we've ever had. Every single one. When they first started, the big goal of any reporter, field reporter, is to become an anchor because they think it's a cushy job.
Yeah.
And they discover very quickly that it's not. They do get the hang of it. Part of the problem is the operator has to keep up with you. If he's going too fast, you have to talk faster. If he's going too slow, so it's a very difficult thing. In the days of Up to the Minute, we didn't have the luxury of a prompter operator, so the talent operated their own. And what was fascinating was they initially all had the same reaction. They were, I run my own teleprompter. I'm an anchor. How dare you? But then they would quickly discover that if they had control over it, they could adjust the speed themselves. And once,
Right.
and I would tell them, I said, guys, I know you're upset and you're used to not having to do this, but trust me, you will like it. And sure enough, within about a day, they would go, oh yeah, this is great. and they actually would insist on running their own teleprompter. But look, well, there you go, did it again. You know, we need a buzzer or something to go off when we've hit the 30-minute mark. So as usual, didn't get to some stories. We'll get to them next week. Time, of course, for the inevitable plugs, and of course the first one, Marilyn's blog, the blog you write, the blog I write, Serendipity, Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth. Check it out. Very, very interesting stuff. And of course, our co-podcast, Get Off My Lawn, with somebody named Tom Curley, where we talk about life, the universe, and well, whatever the hell else I want to talk about. And of course, Voicescapes Audio Theater for the best in audio theater and drama. Yep, we absolutely did it again. I can't believe we did it. So we will see each other
and we left
next
off
week.
Yep,
and until then, toodaloo, guys.